So, through the lens of love, photograph what makes your heart sing is kind of something that I've been known for to say. And of course, Cole has spoken about vision quite frequently, and he and I both have very strong feelings about vision. So this presentation, like most of my presentations, come from my life experiences, both as a photographer and so my own journey with photography, but also as a workshop leader for over 15 years of working with people in the field and seeing their processes and observing and having conversations. So, oh, why did that not work? Hang on. There we go. So let's start with a couple of questions tonight. Maybe questions that you've not considered before, but I think are reasonably important. One of those questions is, why do you make photographs? And then the next one is, what lens do I see the world through? And let me give you some thoughts here to maybe guide how you might think about this tonight and how you might think about this in the days to come, months to come, years to come. Because I do think the lens that we see the world through tends to change as we mature as human beings, as we learn new things, as we study new things, as we look at other art and so forth. I think the possibilities of how we see the world can change. And so you might or might not see the world through something of connection to animals. I have a deep connection to horses because I grew up with horses and I love horses. But I went to Kenya not too long ago and just fell in love with the opportunity to see these amazing animals. DeWitt Jones, a famous, National Geographic photographer, um, who's become my friend because we teach together. When asked what he would die for, his response was, without thinking about it, beauty. He's just taken by beauty. Here's my wife in Hawaii, and sometimes she's so taken by the wonder of it all that she can't even pull the camera up to her face and make a photograph. She's just so in, you know, in captured, I guess, is by wonder. And I can be personally can be captured by awe, just in the awe of the moment. This is the Alabama Hills out in California in the Lone Pine area. And every time I go there and I hit this gorgeous morning light, when that first light comes up, it's just, I'm struck with awe. And again, Namibia, getting to a bucket list place of the Deadvlei and the Sossusvlei area of the dunes over there. I just couldn't even make a photograph. I was just so awestruck. So those are some of the ideas when I say, what lens do you see the world through? How do you connect? How do you see the world in your life? And then you might ask, what lens do you see your photography through? Because that's probably different and it should be different. So you might see the world through a real physical lens, like a telephoto lens. My best friend Dan, before he passed away a couple of years ago, we tried to get him to use a wide angle lens. He just couldn't see that way. It didn't resonate with him at all. He saw the world through a telephoto lens where he could isolate the dunes and not show the big dunes, where he could isolate the beautiful patterns in the Palouse. But there are other people who only see through a wide angle lens. They want to capture all of it, all of the Palouse, all of the dunes. And there's no right or wrong answer to these questions. But I find it very instructive to actually consider and answer those questions. You might be a macro photographer and see the world through the lens of macro, up close, intimate pieces of flowers. Or a weed called salsify out in the Palouse. So you might see the world close up. My mentor, Nancy Rotenberg, was a brilliant macro photographer. She struggled with any other lens, but boy, she saw the world up close and personal in a way that I'd never seen before. You might be a color photographer and just mesmerized by color and die for color. Sherry Mabe, who goes by Starlit Waltz on social media, is a brilliant infrared photographer. And she's been on a number of workshops with me. And as much as she tries to shoot color, she just finds herself in love with infrared. My passion to this day is primarily black and white photography. It was what I fell in love with as a kid and why my dad built a darkroom for me. And to this day, that's what I just love is black and white photography. Part of the reason I love black and white is this anonymous quote. With color, we look at the photograph. With black and white, we look into the soul. I'll add the word soul of the photograph, or we look at the bones of the photograph. So sometimes color is so visceral, it gets in the way of really what I'm being taken by. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. You might see the world through the lens of another person. And I find that's a phase that can be easy to go through because I saw this very image photographed by a brilliant photographer and friend of mine, Tony Sweet. And I asked him where it was. I went back or went to Cape May and found this location and made the very same photograph. It's a derivative photograph, just like this one. I saw it, asked where it was, and did it. It was kind of my way of learning, and that might be the lens you're using at this point in your life too, because you haven't developed that confidence to be able to just go find images on your own. You might follow the rules. And so I'm going to digress here a little bit and tell a story about rules. Um, and this will be similar to Cole's thoughts, I'm sure, that he probably shared last year and this year. But here's the story. So I'm in Death Valley with Cole, actually. Cole's way over to the right somewhere, working with a group on long exposures. And I wander away with a couple others this direction. But I notice someone who's not in my group making photographs, and I want to make sure I'm not getting in their way. So I keep skirting around, thinking that they might be using a wide angle lens. And I finally get close enough, and I'm going to go and show a couple of more images because the story's a little longer and I don't want to bore you with one image here, but I'm going out of the way to not be in her way. And I finally get close enough, and she says, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, well, I'm a photographer. I'm making some photographs. I'm co-leading a photography workshop." And she says, "Well, where's your foreground?" And I was like, "That's a weird. I've just met you 2 minutes ago, and your first question is, where's your foreground?" I said, "Well, what do you mean?" She says, "Well, don't you know a good photograph should have a foreground, a midground, and a background?" And I just kind of chuckled, and I said, "No, it's not the way I think, and that's not the way I compose." Well, one thing leads to another, and I learned that she has an MFA, a Master's in Fine Art, and and I felt like Cole has said in one of his presentations that she could only see the potential for a good photograph through the rules of composition. That's not how I show up and make photographs. I organize a frame so it feels good. It may follow the rules, I suppose. It could. Um, but I'm not thinking about the rules as I'm creating and making images. And then she finds out that I'm co-leading with Cole Thompson. She knew who he was, loved his work. And I thought it was rather humorous because if there's anybody who doesn't follow the rules, it's Cole. But she, became a fangirl. So if you're following rules as your lens that you're photographing through, I would encourage you to consider, the possibility of just filling the frame with what feels good, how it makes it feels right. Some of you might see through the lens of a love for technology or a love for post-processing, learning about infrared and getting the right infrared conversion. I mean, that might be fun. And that's how you see. I have a friend of mine, Scott, that's him. And I champion him. That's the connection to photography that he loves. I had to learn about night sky photography and learn how to get rid of the high ISO noise and all that good stuff. I had to learn about image processing to make it look exactly what it looked and felt like at that moment in the Alabama hills. It was magical that day. Some of you might do it to create art. And art is in the eye of the beholder. I don't know if these images or any of my images rise to the level of art. I'll let you decide whether my images might fit into the category of fine art. But, I think Cole pursues making images that are very artistic, and I think he's very successful in doing that. And I certainly think that's part of the lens or a lens that he looks through for his photography. Some people enjoy Photographic Society of America, for instance, and they want to compete to win accolades and to win points and scores and get to be certain levels in PSA or in your club or what have you. Again, there's no right or wrong. I'm not going to judge whether you like to compete or don't like to compete, but it's instructive to know if that's the lens that you view your photography through. Again, it's fine. If that's what you find enjoyment from, then I support that. But if you're not finding enjoyment through competing, maybe there's another lens that you might consider. And some of those might be what I've just spoken of. Others, others like me, it's my sole source of income to make a living. So sometimes I'm making photographs knowing that I might be able to sell them. And that's a very different lens to look through than making photographs that make my heart sing. But sometimes I need to do both of those things. This sold for $1,500 to the University of Idaho. They built a new ag school lobby, and this is a 6 foot by 12 foot print that they had printed. I just had to supply them the file. So that was kind of fun. Other people have purchased some of my horse photographs. So some of you might photograph because you need to make a little extra money or to help pay the bills, and that's a perfectly valid reason. Or some of you might, like Cole and me, photograph, from a vision, from an understanding of vision and what your vision is. And we'll talk about that a little bit more here as we move forward with the presentation. Okay. So those are basically three questions. Why do you photograph? What lens do you see the world through? And then, what lens do you see your photography through? I think important questions that are worth your time considering. So what's my journey look like? How did this happen for me? Well, the first thing I had to do was learn the craft. And I remember being with my mentor, Nancy Rotenberg, and saying, John, if you have white snow, what do you got to do with exposure compensation? And I said, I have no idea. And she says, well, you got to add light to light. And I'm like, what are you talking about? What do you mean add light to light? There's just light right here. What are you talking about? And it was just horribly difficult for me to wrap my head around, exposure compensation and adding a stop to a snow scene or stop and a half to make. So anyways, the craft, I had to learn, about craft and about image processing and about um, depth of field, right? All those things were a challenge. And I had to figure those things out before I started worrying about, are my pictures good? I mean, or, is this composition better than the other composition? But that came next. learning about composition and what felt better than other things. And so that was helpful. So the way I feel about craft is, that we need to understand technique so well that we're freed from the constraints of craft and liberated to pursue our vision or what makes our heart sing, or pursue, things that, like this idea of seeing through the lens of love. So craft was certainly important, and it is important. But then what did I do? I took those ideas, and like I said to you with Tony's picture, I started copying, other people and doing what they were doing. And that I finally got to a place where that didn't really feel good. I wanted to be able to create something of my own. And so I had a major breakthrough when I was in South Africa. My friend who traveled with me there, I was going to study with the brilliant Freeman Patterson there. I dropped off the airplane, and Farrell says to me, John, on this trip for the next 17 days, while we're in South Africa, I don't want you to look through one other's viewfinder. I want you to be able to go home having made images that are uniquely yours. I looked at him and said, what are you, nuts? I'll not make any good photographs, because I just didn't have confidence. But I did it. I accepted that challenge. It was one of the best things I've ever done. It was a turning point for me to realize that I was capable, that I learned that I could believe that I could do it. And Nancy Rotenberg, the mentor I keep calling here, or speaking of, she too helped me to believe in myself, that I was and could be creative, that I could move my camera, that I could make different Aurora pictures than somebody else, that I could make my own unique photographs from all these locations and not worry about whether or what others were doing and the right answers that they were coming up with, but rather I could find my own right answers. I just needed to believe that I could. Excuse me while I just take a quick drink. So, vision. So, what the heck is it? Well, I'm sure this was probably spoken of by Cole last month, but it's always worth another moment, because, again, at the end of this, you're going to be able to write to me and tell me how I was so much better than Cole. Joking, joking. So, vision is the unique way that you see the world based on your life experiences. So, vision is made up your religious beliefs, your political beliefs, the education that you have or don't have, your upbringing, where you were brought up and where you live now, the books you've read, the movies you've seen, the news you consume, COVID, a new relationship, a death of a pet, all that stuff informs your vision, which ultimately then gets slathered all over your art. And in this case, your images. And we each have our own unique vision. There's no right or wrong vision. And you bring your vision with you as you photograph. You can't avoid it. You can certainly pretend that you don't have a vision, and you can not take time to think about what your vision is. But when you finally accept that you do have one and you start to analyze what that is and spend some time, then it's even more powerful. Then you can actually access all of that and create images that are in harmony with that vision. So ultimately, what do you bring to this act of photography? Ultimately, you bring you and all of your flaws and all of your greatness and all your craziness. You bring you. And that's a really, really good thing, because you are good enough. And you are great and wonderful and capable and unique and talented So then I started putting it all together. I was blessed to have Nancy Rothenberg as an incredible mentor. Before Nancy, I had Tony Sweet, and I took workshops with him, and he helped me see kind of the technical understanding of photography and how to organize my frame. Nancy Rothenberg taught me to get in touch with my feelings and vision and all of that, all of the other intangibles that getting my heart involved with photography. And then my buddy Dan Sniffen, my best friend at the time, who passed not too long ago, he helped me kind of marry those two things together and realized that I see the world through the lens of love. I realized that I fall in love with subjects and I can't help it but photograph them. This is my granddaughter a number of years ago. She's now 13, but she's sitting on my lap, and I happen to have a little Fuji camera in my hand at my desk all the times. And, it was a fleeting little moment, but of a photograph of a lifetime. Why? Because I love Abby. I love the trees that I photograph. I love what all these images I'm showing you. I realize my connection, the way I see the world, the way I show up is through the lens of love. And I realize that how I embrace the world, how I show up in the world, how I approach others matters, not only to me as a human being, but to my photography. So some suggestions. So what do you love? Ask those questions. What do you love? And what does it take? Well, for one, it takes being open, being still, and being vulnerable, just for a few things to chat about. So being open, what does that really mean? Well, it means being open to being taken. You see, I think for the type of photography I do, it's different if you're a portrait photographer. It's different if you're a fashion photographer. It's different if you're a still life organizing things to photograph. I understand that in those situations you need to, be mindful of the what's in the frame and what you're adding, right? That's a very creative process in and of itself. But for me, I don't go out and take pictures. It's the wrong language. I actually go out to be taken. I think that's a very different paradigm. I think it's backwards to say that I'm going to go out to take pictures because I don't think that's what really happens. I was taken by these two beautiful women in Cuba. And then I was open. Remember, we're talking about being open. I was open to another right answer. So be open to being taken, be open to another right answer, something maybe more meaningful. I think this is a much more interesting photograph of those two beautiful ladies. Being open to, out of the corner of my eye, seeing this incredible staircase with red, orangey red. I'm like, are you kidding? How do I not stop and make a photograph? I was going up these stairs at a local museum next to me that I have private access to do work for them and also to bring workshops through. And I saw these shadows that day I'd never seen before. And I couldn't help. I was stopped and I had to make a photograph. I was open to being taken. So also, we need to be still. Sometimes the only way that we can see more deeply or that we can be taken is to settle down, to settle ourselves a little bit and just be until we finally say, okay, that's a church in Boston I'm looking down on. There's nothing to photograph, is my first thought. But then as I sat there and I thought about what am I falling in love with? What am I being taken by? And over the course of 10 or 15 minutes, I realized the light, that the way it was reflecting off of those pews was just mesmerizing to me. So I filled the frame with what I was falling in love with. I waited for this scene to change a million times in the Smokies as cloud shadows kept on going through there. I waited and I was patient and I was still to wait for the fog to settle and create a very different mood. I got here and I knew there was a photograph, but it was horribly difficult because it was so incredibly busy. A number of other photographers stopped with me. They gave up quickly because it was hard. But I knew that if I stood still for long enough and settled and got rid of all of the doubt, the uncertainties, the fears, the negative self-talk, all that stuff that was getting in the way of being taken, I could find a worthy image. So sometimes we just need to be still and allow ourselves to be taken. And sometimes that means we've got to be vulnerable. I am not a people photographer. I find it very difficult. I'm 6'6" tall, so I find myself to be an ogre, in this big person taking up this space. And I feel, especially with women, that I'm gawking at them, and I'm uncomfortable with that feeling. I've raised two daughters. I have two granddaughters in the house with me now, and I want them to be seen as smart, intelligent, wonderful women. And I don't want them to be looked at as objects to photograph. So it's really hard for me to, and you talk about being in a very vulnerable position. It's horribly difficult, but I've learned to accept it and be gracious about it and grateful, thankful, and kind. A lot easier when you got a guy like Mel out at the ranch where we photograph. It's a lot easier. But, through being vulnerable, I've learned to accept that these wonderful hula dancers who come sometimes to our retreat in Molokai are are giving of themselves. And if I can get through that vulnerable moment, I might be able to make some, worthwhile images that express the connection that I was having to them. And so, really, what I'm suggesting is that by being still and being open and being vulnerable, we can let images come to us. We can learn to be taken. If my words don't resonate, let's think about a couple of brilliant photographers. They say a very similar thing. A photograph is neither taken nor seized by force. It offers itself up. The next question for me is, are you in a place where you can notice that? Ernst Haas says, you don't take pictures. The good ones happen to you. And once again, the next question is, are you in a place where that can happen to you, where you can be taken? Taken by the backlight in the wrong time of the day, according to the experts. You don't want to be photographing midday, but on the midday in or late September, early October in Colorado, I couldn't help but make a photograph of what I saw. I'm shooting almost directly into the sun. You're not supposed to do that, but that's what I was being taken by. I was being taken by the cool light in the shadow areas in Namibia here and that beautiful warm light in the background. I pulled into a place in the Palouse where I take people to photograph a huge granary and do some abstracts. And I'm sure there's maybe not one other person who's ever liked this photograph. Although the last lecture I did, somebody actually said that was one of her favorite photographs. So at least it's resonated with one. But two thoughts. I honestly don't care if you don't like it in the nicest possible way. I don't mean that to be rude at all, because I photograph for me, and I was just so taken by the white railing, and I knew I could make that background of the grain bin darker, and I just liked the way all the lines lined up, even the rivets and bolts or whatever they are. I just loved it, and so that's what I was taken by. Or I know many of you, like me, have probably been taken by beautiful reflections of fall foliage in a still pond in shadowed light. Excuse me. Maybe think of it this way. I photograph wow. I was in Longwood Gardens, came around the corner. I'd never seen one of these. It was hanging right in my face. I literally said out loud, wow. I mean, I was just blown away. Well, I've trained myself that if I say wow out loud, which I normally do, or to myself, I am going to stop and make a photograph. I suggest you adopt the same practice. Came around the corner in Cades Cove in the Smoky Mountains. I mean, I screamed out loud. You have got to be freaking kidding me. That's pretty much wow. And I had to stop and make a photograph. The light was getting late. The tree was in shadow in the dead vley over in Namibia. I turned around from the direction I was photographing and I just was like smack dab in my face. Wow. So, regardless of whether I was going to make a photograph or not, I've trained myself to photograph wow. Fill the frame with wow. That's what wow was. It wasn't the whole tree, it was that. Or if that doesn't work for you, how about photograph what turns your head? You're looking one way and then you look and you go, the heck? My gosh, that's crazy. Or if that doesn't work for you, photograph moments of perception. Any of these are synonymous. They're the same thing. They're just different ways to say it. I was going up to Grand Prismatic Spring here, and out of the corner of my eye, while crossing that footbridge, I looked and I saw all these fumaroles steaming like crazy, and there's a fisherman in the stinking river. I'm like, are you kidding me? And I couldn't help but stop. 150 other photographers walked by, never made a photograph. I've learned to pay attention to wow, what turns my head, moments of perception, and I stop and I make photographs. I stop and make photographs with what I'm falling in love with. So ultimately, I stop and pay attention and photograph what makes my heart sing. I suggest you do too. I mean, how can you not love puffins? If there's anybody here who doesn't love puffins, leave now. I mean, they're cute. Oh my gosh, how can you not love puffins? Or a beautiful, legit cowgirl, or a beautiful hula dancer, or a beautiful African blue poppy, or an elephant. I'm not an elephant, hello. Or a giraffe. Oh, sorry. Or incredible fog up at Owl Creek Pass in Colorado. Or the rhythm of the aurora. So one of my goals was to be published in what I think is the finest magazine published, and that's a magazine by Brooks Jensen called Lens Work. If you don't subscribe, I highly recommend you do. There's only 4 issues a year, but then there's all sorts of online content that you can almost not keep up with. So here's a black and white aurora. Why? Well, I think it's a great example of what I'm trying to share. When I got home and thought about what was I taken by with my photographs of the aurora, it had nothing to do with color. What I was taken by, what blew me away, was the rhythm of the aurora and the shapes that the aurora made. That's what I was attracted to. That's what I was taken by. That's what I wanted to photograph. And so by removing the color, it helped me to express to you, the viewer, that that's what I was photographing. And so that's what was accepted and published in Lens work. So let me use my another hero of mine, Freeman Patterson, to teach us tonight about this concept of learning to see more deeply. I couldn't say it any better, and so I gave up trying. So Freeman says, seeing in the finest and broadest sense means using your senses, your intellect, and your emotions. It means encountering your subject matter with your whole being. It means looking beyond the labels of things and discovering the remarkable world around you. But read that again. I think it's really important. Seeing more deeply, I'll add my own little editorial to this. Seeing more deeply and in the finest and broadest sense means using your senses, all of them. It means using your intellect, your knowledge about camera gear and composition and so forth, and your emotions, slathering your heart all over your photographs. It means encountering your subject matter, not with just your eyes, but your whole being. It means looking beyond the labels of things and discovering the remarkable world around you. So, with that, we need to be careful though, because in order to be able to see more deeply, we need to be careful about things like this iPhone and a computer and the mass stimuli Freeman talks about that's always being presented to us, that's always being in our face, and that preoccupation with our own self and with the mass stimuli that we can be overwhelmed with. It's going to be very difficult to see more deeply, as Freeman expresses, because we're so wrapped up in our own self and our own world and in the world of everything that's out there on the internet. So think about those thoughts of seeing more deeply, and also about, do we find those quiet times to allow ourselves to just be? So how do we show up? How do you show up to make photographs? What is your head space? How do you show up spiritually, physically, emotionally? Well, one of the things in the contemplative photography retreat that I do with a Zen priest, an amazing human being, Flint Sparks, and we've been doing it out in Hawaii for many years, but he's just moved with his husband to Santa Fe, so we're going to move it stateside and continue with our contemplative retreat. But Flint teaches this idea of GAP. GAP means it's an acronym for grounded, aware, and present. So grounded, are you showing up fully grounded, recognizing you're in this place, your tripod is connected to the ground, your feet are connected to the ground, excuse me, and you're grounded. And then are you aware? And awareness to me is best explained by the first time I'm doing meditation in the yurt that we have available to us out there in Molokai. And Flint is leading a very casual meditation, not a formal meditation. We didn't want people to be uncomfortable, but we wanted to introduce the idea that meditation can be very helpful for your art. And, I've got my eyes closed, doing my best to follow the instruction. And, he says, grounded and aware. And he's teaching this concept. And he says, awareness, like being aware of who's on your left and who's on your right and who's in front of you. And I felt incredibly shamed, not uncomfortable is a better word, because I didn't know who was on my left or my right or in front of me. And it taught me how unaware I was. And so awareness, grounded, being grounded, connected, being aware of everything around you, above you, below you, in front of you, behind you. And then present. Are you really present in that moment that you're out there, grounded and aware? Present with what Freeman's talking about, to the smell of the air, to the warmth of the sun, to the experience that you're having, to the connection that you're having. Grounded, aware, present. And then quoting Ernst Haas again, the limitations of photography are in yourself, or what you see or what we see is only what or who we are. And that's that vision concept again. You're slathering your vision, which is who you are, as Ernst is saying here, all over your images. So there's a few obstacles to be mindful of. I mentioned one before: fears, uncertainties, and doubts, or lack of confidence. Some of these we've already covered. The rules, I think, can get in the way sometimes. You can get in the way, and all that negative self-talk. Comparison we'll spend a little bit more time on. Technical knowledge, or maybe lack of. Expectations we'll spend a minute on, and labels will take a minute. So fears, uncertainties, and doubts. Be careful with your feelings of inadequacy. They are real. I mean, I feel them to this day when I'm in a location and I hear somebody, oh, this is fantastic. And I'm over there going, I'm not seeing it. And I can immediately go into that place of, how come? How come they're having a great time? They're getting it, but I'm not. So fears, uncertainties, and doubts about your capability are real. Feelings of inadequacy are real. They're human. So my hope, though, is that you will meet those feelings of inadequacy lovingly and gently say to yourself, but I'm good enough. I'm okay. I'm perfectly fine right where I am. And though they're having these moments over there of connection and I'm not, it doesn't mean anything about my photography. It doesn't mean anything about my capabilities or skill. They're falling in love with what they're falling in love with because of their life. And their life is different than mine. Failure is success in progress, a paradigm shift. Failure is a resource. It helps you find the edge of your capacity. So I hope you go away from tonight's discussion realizing that when you go out and somebody is helping you to learn intentional camera movement and you do 1,000 of them and you don't get one you like, you have not failed. Nope. All you've done is learned the edge of your capability and your capacity at that moment in time. And then you'll go back and you'll rethink it and you'll look at the images and you'll say, oh, I think I need to move the camera faster. Or maybe I need to try a different shutter speed. And you go out again and you fail again. And then you all of a sudden have success. So reframe failure as just learning what won't work, which is equally as important as what will work. Teddy Roosevelt said, comparison is the thief of joy. And I say, yes. So be careful about comparing yourself to other members in your clubs. Oh man, that Rosie, she is just fantastic. She's so much better than me. All of the joy just got sucked out of your life when you do that. No, you can admire Josie's images or Stan's images or whomever while still loving your own work and not falling prey to that robbing of the joy that you're having in the photos, in the images that you're creating from your unique vision. So be careful with comparison and don't let it steal your joy. Labels. Freeman talks about labels. Monet talks about labels. And what they're saying, if you remember his little thing that I read and read twice, one of the things he talked about was avoid labeling things. Avoid saying something is good or bad. Avoid saying something is pretty or ugly. Avoid saying something is a tree or a face or a lamp. In other words, don't name something, because when you name something, you eliminate all the other things it might be. So a face is an oval, an evergreen tree is a triangle. The most simplest of compositions, the ocean and the sky, is not an ocean and sky, it's two rectangles. It's not good light or bad light, it's just light. I was in South Africa with Freeman, and we're going out at 11 in the morning to go photograph the poppies. I'm super excited. But I ask very honestly and innocently, Freeman, why are we going out at 11 o'clock to photograph the poppies? All the good light was like 3 hours ago. He says, really? And I realized at that moment, uh-oh, I obviously don't get it, because this is, my hero, Freeman Patterson. He's saying, huh, really? I never thought about it that way. And I went, okay. And he says, John, I never think about it as good or bad light. It's just light. And he says, oh, by the way, the poppies don't open up until it's warm enough, and that's generally around 11 o'clock. So obviously there was a real reason, but it was very instructive, and that has stuck with me forever. Stop qualifying and quantifying light or anything, because then you limit the possibilities. And don't let anybody tell you what you can and cannot do with your images. They're your images. It's your art. Why would you allow somebody to comment on your vision and your art? Honor your vision, honor the way that you want to fill the frame. And be careful of expectations. Man, to me, they can be as dangerous as comparison. You have an expectation. Boy, you're leading tours around the world as I do. Well, crap, we're in New Zealand, and man, across this lake, if we had still water, is a great mountain. And we arrive there on the bus, and I'm like, oh, crap. Well, I say that to myself, and then I quickly pivot because I realize there's nothing I can do about it. So what am I going to do? Moan and groan that we don't have what we scouted? Or do we show up and say, let's find another right answer? And I found this wonderful photograph of Zen. It's a very simple photograph of light, and I love it. One time I went to the Palouse to Steptoe Butte, and I decided I was going to photograph all in infrared. And again, as you've heard, I decided to go photograph the aurora in black and white, because that's what I was being attracted to. Or the Kerrang over in Isle of Skye in Scotland. Just a few thoughts left. You have experiences and talents that are exclusive to you. You need to trust that you do. You need to believe that you do. And again, that's a good thing, because that's what makes you uniquely you, and your images uniquely yours. And let me finish with this thought. When out photographing, it's with a sense of play. No bounds in sight. Anything's possible. And the unexpected welcome. What a great way to show up to make photographs. So master the technical aspects and develop your vision, meaning understand what vision is and learn what your vision is. Then open your heart to the possibility of photographing through the lens of love. And go out and make images that make your heart sing. So thank you for spending this time with me tonight. Again, I appreciate that it's time, that you could be doing other things. I hope something I've shared tonight may have resonated, that you found some value to the discussion. You can take a screenshot if you want, that's fine. I can be reached, and I'm happy to get emails. JohnBarclayPhoto@me.com, website, Barclay Photo, Instagram and Facebook, John Barclay Photo. I try to keep it all kind of uniform. And then YouTube, the show that we've talked about, and my dear friend Cole, who we genuinely tease each other all the time. It's all in good fun. There's no harm done. It is the Cole and John Show. If you search for that on YouTube, we'd love to have you follow along. We rarely go any longer than 10 minutes. We try to keep it 5 to 7 minutes. And it's conversations about these types of things that he spoke about last month and that I've spoken about tonight. We don't talk about gear and composition and all those things.